Alrighty, so today's lesson is going to be on length in the metric system. So make sure we're jotting down those notes, highlighting all of those things, and I'll make sure to talk about a few of those things when we are listening to this video. Alright, and before we start actually writing down our notes and continuing on with this lesson on length, we need to know our purpose. What are we looking for? What are we trying to learn? And the first thing we need to know is the SI unit for measuring length. So we'll learn that here in this lesson. And number two, we want to know how to measure length of an object using the metric system. So you know how we're measuring length using that metric system. So not only know what length is, but know how to use it within the metric system. And the first thing I always like to do is let's look at, all right, the English, what we're really familiar with, and then the metric system, something maybe we're slightly less familiar with. I think it can be kind of hard if we don't add that context. You know, we know miles pretty well, but do we know kilometers, right? All those things. And, 1 yard, 1 meter, 1 inch, or 1 centimeter. These are really, miles, yards, inches. Those are really common measurements that we're more used to. We're less used to kilometer, meter, and centimeter. So we're going to get some context as to how close in relation are they, so we can get better at just understanding, conceptualizing, thinking about how far these distances or lengths are. So the first one that we have is 1 mile or 1 kilometer. And if we look here, we get some information. 1 mile is going to be equal to 1.6 kilometers. And so with that information, we can see that 1 mile is worth more kilometers, which means if we're looking at this, 1 mile is going to be larger than our kilometer, right? So for every mile we travel 1.6 kilometers, about 1.5 kilometers, but just a little over. This means that if you are someone who doesn't like to run and someone gives you the choice of running 1 mile or 1 kilometer, pick the kilometer because you're ultimately going to go a shorter distance. All right, and here we go. So now we're moving on to our next one. So we have 1 yard versus 1 meter. And so if you look, we have a meter stick, we have a yard stick. And so we see that 1 yard is just short of a meter. We can see that just over here on the side. We can see that over here on the side, we're just short, right? So if we kind of draw this line, we can see that our meter stick has a little bit of a longer length attached to it, right? So we have just about this much further of length that we have for a meter stick. So meter stick, it's really close to a yard, but meter stick is going to be just a little bit longer for us. And so with that, we're going to circle our 1 meter as our option here. Okay, moving right along, and now we're on 1 inch or 1 centimeter. And now if you look at our example over here, we get saying 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. So if we're looking, we can identify that we have 1 inch right here. So on the top, so if we kind of think of this line here as dividing the two systems, okay, so kind of get you to feel that images, where we have inches on the top and we have centimeters on the bottom. I know that this down here says millimeters. We've talked about how all those little dashes, those are millimeters, right? But then these numbers here, those numbers on the bottom, okay, those are our centimeters. All right. So if we're looking at that information, we can pretty easily see that our 1 for our inches, okay, that puts us at right about there or so. And so we can see that then we have about 2.54 centimeters. And so then that's going to get us our conversion, right? So we can see that we have 2 and then we go 5 over. Those are 5 millimeters and really just past that. We're not quite, it's hard to tell, but we're not quite to that next one, that's 6. And that's where we get this extra little 4 here. All you really need to remember, 1 inch is about 2.5 centimeters. For you kind of thinking about which one's bigger or smaller. So centimeters, definitely smaller. So let's go ahead and circle 1 centimeter. Whoops, I'm sorry, I did the wrong thing. Let me fix that. And we definitely want to have our inch. There we go. All right, so moving right along here. So looking now more at these metric units, we see that the basic unit of length in the metric system is the meter and is represented by a lowercase letter m. So definitely you're going to want to have that information. You're going to want to know what the basic unit for length is. That'll help us with our conversions, all those things. And in this case, our basic unit for meters as our length is also the SI. So the SI unit for the meter or for length is the meter. So make sure we make note of that as well. And so we're going to want to, let's see, make sure we go through and highlight. We got basic unit as important, meter is important, abbreviating with that letter M is super important. And then we also want to identify the idea that the meter is also our SI unit for length. All right. And now the standard, this isn't something that you need to know a lot. It's more of just kind of a nice thing to know. So this standard is really how do we come up with the length of a meter? And there's really two different ways. One, a meter originally was defined as the length from the equator, or a fraction rather, of from the equator to the North Pole, or the pole of the planet. Another one is the distance traveled by light in absolute vacuum, and 1/299,792,458 of a second. Essentially, this is a really tiny number. Light's really fast, and so that's how long light takes to travel that distance. That's a meter, or in that amount of time. So it's more of that's how we decided upon it. That's the standard, since light is a constant. It's a reliable measure. Our metric units, so some common units of measure. So 1 kilometer being 1,000 meters, 1 meter being 100 centimeters, abbreviated with that cm, and 1 meter being 1,000 millimeters, with that mm. And of course, meter itself can be abbreviated with the lowercase letter m. So if we're looking at that, we have all these different amounts of lengths here in these questions. We're just going to do a little bit kind of practicing those conversions, getting that idea of what's bigger. And so if we're looking at that, which one is bigger? So if we look, so which is larger, 1 meter or 105 centimeters? Well, 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters, so 105 is bigger. So there's our answer. And then now moving on to letter B, 4 kilometers or 4,400 meters. That's going to be 4,400 meters, because if we look above, 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. And continuing right along, 12 centimeters or 102 millimeters. Okay, so this one's a little interesting, right? So if we have 12 centimeters, okay, so 12 centimeters or 102 millimeters. Well, 100 or 2 millimeters is going to be, well, if we convert it into centimeters, right? So if we think back to our metric staircase, in which we have, our cm, and then we have our mm, right? And if we have to move one place over, so if we say, okay, we have to move one this direction, okay, so if we do that, and our decimal place is really right here, and then we have to move it our one spot, that's going to be 10.2 millimeters, which means our 12 centimeters is going to be bigger. Okay, and finally we have our 1,200 millimeters or 1 meter. Well, 1 meter is 1,000 millimeters, and since 1,200 is bigger than 1,000, we have that. All right, this is really just kind of, again, that idea of multiples of 10 for our metric system. Nothing that you need to write down in your notes, but we do want to just kind of have that, again, that idea. 10 millimeters is a centimeter, 100 centimeters is a meter, and then 1,000 meters is going to be our kilometer, and then it gives you an idea of scale. And so the idea being that, if we're measuring the lengths on land, that's probably when we're better off using those kilometers. All right, how many millimeters are in 1 centimeter? So we just answered that, and that's going to be 10, right? 1 centimeter equals 10 millimeters. All right, so if we have that, and we can identify that if we look just above here, so we go from the 0 centimeter mark and we go to here, okay, that's 1 centimeter. But if we go through and we count, we can say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so as we count these dashes, we get those 10 spots, and so that gives us our 10 millimeters. Okay, and now moving on here. So if we want to figure out what is the length of the line in centimeters, and so if we're looking down here, we want this line, and we're looking at that. So what is the length of that line in centimeters? So if we have going right about to here, so we're going to have 2, and we can get to this, which is 5. So 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8. And then our next question is asking us about that line as well, but now in millimeters. And if for every centimeter there's 10 millimeters, we can just multiply that answer by 10. So we multiply our 2.8, right? So if we say, well, if we have 10 in each one of those, and you could go through and you could count them, right? So if we go through and we do that, just to double check ourselves, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. And 2.8 times 10 is 28. And finally now, for getting here, so what is the length of the line to the nearest centimeter? So again, we're basically going to the nearest point. And if we're looking, okay, so we can see that our line ends here, and either we can go to our 2, or we can go to our 3, and we can see that we can just travel a distance this far to get to our 3. But if we have our blue, then we have to travel a distance all the way over to here. So our closest is definitely going to be to 3. So our answer is going to be 3 centimeters. All right, and now here's how we end our notes, right? We summarize our notes, then you put a nice little box around it to make it stand out as our summary. The things we were supposed to have learned is know that SI unit for measuring length, and know how to measure the length of an object using the metric system. So you can talk about those things in your summary, essentially answer these questions, right? So the SI unit for length in the metric system is the meter. And we can measure lengths using, meters, millimeters, centimeters. We go to the tick mark on the ruler or meter stick, right? Talk about those things within your summary. Essentially, your summary is answering these purposes. Thanks for watching this video lesson. If you got questions, please let me know. Thanks.